She had a Columbia degree and a cardboard sign. He had an empire and a debt he'd been burying for 3 years. When Declan Cross spotted Amina Sorrow on the corner of Atlantic and 4th, sitting on the frozen concrete, holding her dead husband's watch out to strangers for $40, something inside him didn't just break. It collapsed. Because Kofi Sorrow was his blood brother. And the reason Amina was on that sidewalk was him. What he did next. Nobody saw it coming. Not his crew. Not Amina. Not even Declan himself. The driver had taken a wrong turn. That was all. A detour off 4th to avoid the construction on Atlantic. A 2-minute reroute that should have meant nothing. Declan was in the back of the Range Rover, scrolling through acquisition proposals he didn't want to read, when something outside the tinted windows seized his attention and refused to let go. A woman on the sidewalk. Dark coat, too thin for December. Sitting on folded cardboard, one hand outstretched. A man's watch resting in her palm like an offering. He told himself it wasn't her. He told himself that twice. Slow down. His driver, Marcus, glanced in the mirror. Boss. Declan's jaw tightened. Slow down. The Range Rover crawled. And with every foot it moved, the recognition assembled itself piece by piece. The posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she held her chin even now, even in this, like she was refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her fold completely. Amina, his dead brother's wife. The woman he had promised Kofi, on the night Kofi married her, that he would always protect. She was selling Kofi's watch for $40 in the December cold. Declan put his hand on the door. He crossed the street without looking. A cab horn screamed. He didn't flinch. 3 feet from the cardboard, he stopped. Up close, the details landed like blows. Her coat had been mended at the collar with mismatched thread. Her knuckles were cracked from the cold, the skin split at 2 joints. The watch in her palm, Kofi's Seiko, the one Declan had given him for his 30th birthday, had a small handwritten price tag tied around the band. $40. Needs battery. He stood there absorbing that. $40. For a watch that Kofi had worn every day of the last 6 years of his life. For a watch that Amina had fastened on Kofi's wrist every morning while he was still half asleep. $40 because $40 was the price of a bed at the women's shelter on Fulton Street if you got in line before 5. She had learned that math. She had been forced to learn that math. Amina looked up. The recognition came in stages, confusion, then sharpening focus, then a slow, controlled stillness that was somehow worse than rage. Her eyes, dark and devastating, went flat. No, she said. Not a question. A verdict. He said her name. It came out rough, like a word he hadn't used in too long. She said, "Walk away, Declan." He didn't. "You didn't know?" he said. Her chin lifted slightly. "I know you didn't. That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't look." He had no defense. There was no architecture of justification strong enough to hold weight against a woman sitting on cardboard in 30-degree weather trying to sell her dead husband's watch. "Let me help you." She said the word back to him like it tasted wrong in her mouth. "Help." She turned it over. "You want to help me?" 3 years later. On a Wednesday in December. "Yes." "Why?" He had too many answers, and none of them were clean. "Because you were Kofi's. Because you were freezing. Because I have been lying to myself for 3 years about whether you were okay, and now I am standing in front of the proof that you were never okay, and the debt I owe you is so large I cannot calculate it. Because I should have done it the day we buried him," he said. Amina stared at him for a long time. A city bus rolled past. Steam rose from a grate in the sidewalk between them. "I don't want your guilt money. I'm not offering money." "Then what?" "A room. Food. Time to figure out your next move." She laughed, one short, dry sound, hollow as a coin hitting concrete. "Your house." She looked at him. The house Kofi said ran on secrets and silence. "You want me to live there? I want you to eat a meal tonight. That's all I want right now." If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens inside that house will change everything you think you know about guilt, power, and what a man does when he finally has to face what he broke. Stay with me. She stood slowly, thinner than distance had suggested, her collarbone visible above the neckline of her sweater, her wrists narrow enough to circle with a thumb and forefinger. She folded the piece of cardboard, methodically, carefully, with the precision of someone who had learned to treat even garbage as a resource. Then she tucked it under her arm. "You're bringing the cardboard," Declan said. I'm bringing everything I own. She looked at him without apology. At this point, that's the cardboard. She walked past him toward the Range Rover. She opened the door herself. She got in and pressed herself against the far window, shoulder blades touching the glass. And she did not speak again for the entire drive. Declan sat on the other side of the back seat. 3 feet of leather between them. He watched the city go by outside and understood that those 3 feet were the widest distance he had ever failed to cross. Marcus drove in silence. He knew better than to ask. The house was in Bay Ridge. For stories. Wrought iron gate. A garden his mother had planted before she died that no one had been able to bring themselves to remove. Even now. Even after everything. Amina stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building the way you look at a place someone has described to you in another life. With the eerie recognition of a dream you never chose to have. Kofi told you about this house, Declan said. He told me everything about it. She didn't turn around. That was the problem. He loved you even when he shouldn't have. Inside, the house was warmer than she expected. Not just in temperature, in texture. Dark wood floors. Heavy curtains. A kitchen that smelled like coffee and something herbal, rosemary and thyme layered into the walls. A woman in her 60s stood at the stove. Wiry, alert, silver-streaked hair pinned back. She turned when they entered and processed the situation in approximately 2 seconds without asking a single question. Esther, Declan said, this is Amina. She'll be staying in the guest room. Esther nodded once. I'll put sheets on. She needs to eat first. Esther looked at Amina properly then. The hollowed cheeks, the mended coat, the cardboard tucked under her arm, and something moved behind her eyes. Not pity. Recognition. The look of a woman who had survived her own version of impossible and knew what it looked like on someone else's face. Soup, Esther said simply. And bread. I can eat in the kitchen, Amina said. First word since the car. I don't need room service. Esther looked at Declan. He gave a small nod. Sit wherever you like, Esther said. Amina sat at the kitchen table. Esther set a bowl of groundnut soup in front of her, rich, fragrant, thick with yam and spinach, and a heel of crusty bread on the side. Amina picked up the spoon. Her hand was steady. She ate slowly, not savoring, not performing gratitude. She ate slowly because she had learned that eating too fast after real hunger made you sick. Declan stood in the doorway and watched. And every controlled spoonful was its own indictment. This was a woman who had been forced to learn how to survive the very thing he had exposed her to. He turned and went upstairs. In his study, he sat in his father's chair behind his father's desk and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. The guest room, he had told her. Private bathroom. Lock on the door. She had looked at him then, truly looked at him, for the first time since the sidewalk. A lock. You'll have the only key. Something in her expression had shifted. Not warmth. Not forgiveness. But the grudging acknowledgement that he had anticipated the right concern. That he had understood, at minimum, what she needed to feel safe. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Kofi Soro had been his brother in everything but blood. They had grown up on the same block in Flatbush. Declan, the Irish-Nigerian son of a construction boss turned organization head, and Kofi, the Ghanaian kid 3 doors down who could fix anything mechanical and argued philosophy like it was a contact sport. They had built something together. Not the organization, that had been Declan's inheritance, but the work that surrounded it. Legitimate work. Real work. Kofi had wanted out. He had said so at 30, clearly, soberly, with the kind of quiet certainty that didn't invite debate. I want a real life, December. I want Amina. I want to build things that don't have to disappear. Declan had let him go. He had been proud of him, even. He had told himself that Kofi's departure from the business made him safer. Civilians were beneath notice. Civilians were untouchable. He had been wrong. 3 years ago, a man named Vasile Borkin, head of a Romanian outfit moving through Red Hook, had sent a message. Not through channels. Not through intermediaries. He had taken Kofi from the entrance of the community center where Kofi taught a Tuesday night mechanics class to kids from the neighborhood. Taken him to make a point. Held him to extract concessions. Declan had refused to concede. His advisors had counseled strength. His own pride had counseled strength. The strategic calculus said that bending would cost more than holding the line. He had mobilized. He had sent people. He had pulled every favor he had ever built. They found Kofi in a parking structure in Red Hook 40 hours after he was taken. He had been beaten to death. Declan had called Amina himself. He had stood at this desk and dialed her number, and when she answered, bright, unsuspecting, asking if Kofi was coming home because she'd made his favorite, he had told her. She had been silent for a long time. Then she said, "He was out. He left. They still came for him." "Yes. Because of you." He had not answered. Because the answer was yes, and there was no way to say it that made it survivable. He had not checked on her after the funeral. He had told himself she had family. She had her education. She had her pride. Now, the first week was silence. Amina stayed in the guest room. She came down for meals. Always the kitchen, always the same chair, the one closest to the back door, as if she needed to remember at every moment that she could leave. She ate what Esther prepared. She thanked Esther. She did not thank Declan. She did not speak to Declan except when logistics demanded it. "I need a toothbrush. There are supplies in the bathroom cabinet. The cabinet is locked. I'll have Esther open it." "Fine." Declan gave her the space she was carving out. He left before she came downstairs. He returned after she had gone back to her room. When their paths crossed in the hallway, he stepped aside. He made himself invisible in his own house because she needed the house to be hers for a while. And because he had promised her this was not a redemption narrative he was writing for himself, and the only way to prove it was to stop occupying the center of the story. It was Esther who cracked the silence, not intentionally, not strategically, just by being Esther. On the 9th day, Amina came downstairs and found her struggling with a jar lid, hands stiff with arthritis. Without a word, Amina took the jar, twisted it open, set it on the counter. "Thank you," Esther said. "These hands used to open everything." "My grandmother had the same problem," Amina said. She wrapped a rubber band around the lid. "Gives you grip." Esther looked at her for a moment. Smart woman. She survived the depression in a tenement in the Bronx. She could make a meal out of an onion and an opinion. Esther laughed. A real laugh, not a courtesy. "Sit down. I'm making groundnut stew. You can tell me about her." Declan was in the hallway, coat still on, just arrived. He stood there and listened to Amina's voice shift, the flat, controlled register she used with him giving way to something else entirely. Warmer, rising and falling with the natural rhythm of a person who had once been comfortable in the world. She talked about her grandmother. She talked about growing up in the Bronx. She talked about learning to make rice pudding from an almost empty kitchen and how the recipe had never survived being written down because her grandmother measured everything by touch. He stood in that hallway until his legs ached. He did not walk in. He did not announce himself. He went upstairs because to enter the kitchen would be to end the thing he was hearing, and he would rather stand in the dark than silence it. The second week, the silence changed shape. Not between Amina and Declan. That border remained intact, deliberately maintained on both sides. But her presence began to expand beyond the guest room and the kitchen chair. He found one of his books on the study side table, a dog-eared collection of Ama Ada Edu short stories, with a bookmark he didn't recognize. A folded grocery receipt placed at the beginning of the third story. She was reading his books. He found the back door unlocked one morning and saw footprints in the frozen garden. Small, leading to the bench beneath the bare fig tree his mother had planted against the south wall. She was sitting in his mother's garden. He left the back door unlocked after that. On the 14th night, he came home past midnight. A meeting in Red Hook had gone long, and his jaw was tight from the effort of inhabiting conversations he despised. He walked through the kitchen entrance expecting darkness. The light above the stove was on. Amina was at the table with a mug of tea and a book open in front of her. She looked up. She didn't close the book. "Ama Ada Edu," he said, reading the cover. "I went back to the beginning of the collection." She looked at him steadily. She doesn't waste a word. He moved to the counter, poured a glass of water, stood with his back to the sink. "You could take any book in there. You don't have to ask." "I know." She looked back at her page. "I wasn't asking." He almost smiled. It was the first thing she had said to him that wasn't functional. The first sentence that hadn't been stripped down to pure necessity. "You should sleep," she said, without looking up. "You look like you've been carrying something heavy." He stood at the sink and felt the weight she'd named settled differently. Not lighter, but acknowledged. "Known. I have been," he said, "for 3 years." She didn't respond to that, but she didn't close the book either. 3 weeks in, Amina knocked on the study door. Declan looked up from the desk. She was standing in the doorway in one of Esther's borrowed sweaters, her hair wrapped, a piece of paper in one hand. "I found a paralegal certification program," she said. Starts in February. It's 12 weeks. I could work during, if I could find something part-time in the mornings. He looked at her for a moment. I'm not asking you to pay for it, she said quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to say it out loud to a person so it would feel real. He understood that. The way you speak a plan into existence by making it witnessed. You don't need to work part-time in the mornings, he said carefully. Esther has been managing this house alone for 8 years. She's been asking me for help for 2. Amina looked at him. I'm not offering you charity, he said. I'm offering you a morning, a salary, and enough stability to finish a program without running on empty. If you want it. If you don't, the room is still yours until you have something else. She was quiet for a long time. He watched her weigh it. The dignity of refusing against the reality of what accepting made possible. I want to be clear about something, she said finally. I know. Don't say you know. Hear it. He waited. I am not here because I forgave you. I am not here because I think this makes us even. I am not here because I think you are a good man who made one bad call. I am here because I was cold and I was hungry and I made a practical decision. And I am staying because I need to. She looked at him directly. Don't turn that into something it isn't. I won't, he said. Kofi loved you, she said, and her voice cracked. The first crack, the first fracture in 3 weeks of perfect control. He loved you more than you deserved. And he would hate what happened to both of us. Declan said nothing. There was nothing to say that wasn't already in the room with them. I'm going to bed, Amina said. She turned and walked back down the hall. Her footsteps faded on the stairs. Declan sat in his father's chair and looked at the place in the doorway where she had just stood and understood that the thing she had just given him, not forgiveness, not warmth, not absolution, but the truth, unguarded, spoken out loud in his direction, was more than he had expected and more than he had earned. Outside, the December wind came off the harbor and moved through the garden his mother had planted. The fig tree held its ground. She didn't forgive him that night. She didn't forgive him the next week or the week after that. But on a Tuesday morning in January, she came downstairs and found Declan in the kitchen making coffee, an unusual hour for him. And he slid a mug across the counter without being asked, and she took it, and they stood on opposite sides of the kitchen in silence, looking out at the frozen garden. And for the first time, the silence between them was not a wall. It was something harder to name. Something that required time and honesty and the willingness to stay in the same room without demanding anything from the other person. Some debts cannot be repaid, but they can be faced. And sometimes, facing them is the beginning of something none of us had the language to predict. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you weren't expecting, hit subscribe right now. Because the next chapter of their story goes somewhere darker, deeper, and more powerful than either of them are ready for. And you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there.